Hello everyone. In this video, let us discuss about the concurrency control in databases. A DBMS must be able to ensure that only serializable, recoverable schedules are allowed. And one way to ensure the serializability is to require that the data items be accessed in a mutually exclusive manner. That is, while one transaction is accessing a data item, no other transaction can modify that item. So this DBMS uses locking protocol to achieve this. Okay. Locking protocol is a set of rules to be followed by each transaction in order to ensure that even though actions of several transactions are interleaved, the net effect is identical to executing all transactions in some serial order. That is, it provides a set of rules to make sure that each transaction is ensuring this serializability. Okay. This locking protocol restricts the number of possible schedules. A schedule S is said to be legal if S follows the rules of the locking protocol. A lock is a variable associated with a data item which describes the status of the item with respect to possible operations that can be applied to it. Generally, there is one lock for each data item in the database. And these locks are used as a means of synchronizing the access by concurrent transactions to the database item. So this lock is nothing but a variable associated with each data item which describes the status of the item with respect to that particular operations applied on it. Okay. Now let's look into the various types of locks. First, let us discuss about the binary locks. As the name suggests, this binary lock consists of two states, the locked state and unlocked state, and its corresponding values are 1 and 0. Okay. Based on the value of the lock variable, we can determine whether a particular item can be accessed or not. If the lock on X is 1, then the item X cannot be accessed by a database operation which requests that item. And if the value of the lock on X is 0, that means the item is available and the item can be accessed when requested, and the lock value will be changed to 1. So based on the value of lock variable, we can determine whether the item X can be accessed or not. Two operations are used with binary locking. They are lock item and unlock item. Okay, if a transaction want to access an item X, first it need to issue a lock item of X operation. So that's the first step. If a transaction requests to access an item X, it needs to issue a lock item of X operation. Okay, and if the lock variable on X is equal to 1, then the transaction cannot access that data item, right? So it needs to be in the wait state. It is forced to be in the wait state. And if lock of X is equal to 0, we can access the data item X. So it is set to 1. The lock variable is set to 1 and the transaction is allowed to access the data item X. Okay. And when the transaction is through using the item, that is when the transaction gets completed accessing that item, it issues an unlock item of X operation, and which sets the lock of X back to 0. That means it unlocks the item so that this X can be accessed by other transactions. Hence, a binary lock enforces the mutual exclusion on the data item. That is, only one transaction can access the data item at a time. Okay, so it enforces the mutual exclusion on the data item. Okay, now let's look into the algorithm used in this binary locking. As we just said, the two operations in binary locking are lock item of X and unlock item of X. Okay, when we are issuing this lock item of X, we need to check the value of lock variable. If the lock variable on X is equal to 0, then we can access the data item X and we need to set the value of lock of X as 1. Okay, if lock of X not is equal to 0, that is if it is equal to 1, then the transaction is forced to be in the wait state and it will remain in the wait state until lock of X is equal to 0. And this lock manager wakes up this transaction when this lock of X is equal to 0. Okay, now let's look into the second operation, unlock item of X. Okay, once the read and write operations on X gets completed, then the transaction issues the unlock item of X operation. Okay, so when that operation is issued, then it sets the lock variable as 0. That means it unlocks the item by setting the value of lock variable as 0. And if any transactions are in waiting state, then the lock manager wakes up one of the waiting transactions. Okay, this is the algorithm used in the binary locking. Okay, this lock item and unlock item operations have been implemented as indivisible units. That means it is known as critical sessions in OS. That is, no interleaving should be allowed once a lock or unlock operation is started until the operation terminates or the transaction waits. That means they are implemented as indivisible units. These two operations have been implemented as indivisible units. That means there is no interleaving between these operations. In binary locking, every transaction must obey some rules. Let us look into that. The first rule is a transaction T must issue the lock item of X operation before any read or write operations on X in T. Okay, so it must issue the lock item of X operation before any read item of X or write item of X operations in T. That's the first step. It must issue the lock item of X operation. Then the second point, a transaction T must issue the operation unlock item of X after all read item of X and write item of X operations are completed in T. So once this read and write operations are completed, it must issue the unlock item of X operation. That is the second rule. And the third rule, a transaction T will not issue a lock item of X operation if it already holds the lock on item X. That is, if there is a lock on X, then we cannot issue another lock item of X operation on the same data item X. Then the fourth rule is a transaction T will not issue an unlock item of X operation unless it already holds the lock on item X. Okay, so these are the four rules that every transaction must obey in the binary locking. So before any read or write operations, it must issue the lock item of X operation. After all read and write operations, it must issue the unlock item of X operation. The T1 cannot issue a lock item of X operation if it already holds the lock on item X. It cannot issue an unlock item of X operation unless it already holds the lock on item X. Okay, so these are the four rules in the binary locking. Each lock in the binary locking can be a record with three fields: the data item name, lock, and the locking transaction. Okay, data item name means X, then lock, the locking transaction, let it be say T1 or T2 like that. So each lock can be a record with three fields plus a queue for storing the details of the transactions that are waiting for accessing that particular data item. Okay, so each lock consists of three fields: data item name, lock, locking transaction, plus a queue for storing the waiting transaction details. Then the DBMS has a lock manager system to keep track of and control access to locks. This binary locking is very simple to implement. All that is needed is just a binary valued variable lock. So based on the value of the lock, we can determine whether the data item X can be accessed or not. And this binary locking scheme is too restrictive for database items because at most one transaction can hold a lock on a given item. So only one transaction can hold a lock on a given item. Okay, so this is too restrictive. In binary locking, as we just said, only one transaction can hold a lock on the given item at a time. Okay. But as the read operations on the same item by different transactions are not conflicting, the concurrent access may be allowed on the same item. However, if a transaction is to write an item X, then there occurs a chance for conflicting, and so it must have an exclusive access to X. Okay, so for this purpose, A different type of lock called multiple mode lock is used. So here we'll be having two modes. It can be either in the shared mode or in the exclusive mode. Okay, so this shared exclusive locks can also be called as read or write locks. Okay, so if it is a shared mode, then TI can read but cannot write X. Okay, the shared mode lock on the item X means the transaction TI can read but cannot write X. So this X is shared only for reading, not for writing. Okay, then exclusive. If a transaction TI has obtained a exclusive mode lock on item X, then TI can perform both read and write operations on X. Okay, so we'll be having two modes, shared mode and exclusive mode. Shared mode allows to read but not to write. Exclusive allows both read and write on X. Shared or exclusive locks can also be called as read or write locks. Okay. The three locking operations are there in this shared or exclusive locks. They are read lock of X, write lock of X, and unlock of X. And so the variable lock of X now has three possible states: read locked, write locked, or unlocked. Okay. A read locked item is also called shared locked because the transactions are allowed to read the item, whereas write locked item is called as exclusive locked because the transaction exclusively holds the lock on the item. That means that transaction can perform both the read and write operations on the item. Okay, and each of these three locking operations are considered as indivisible units. When the transaction is in this shared or exclusive lock mode, then it must follow some rules. Let us look into these various rules. The first step is the transactions team must issue the operation read lock of X or write lock of X before any read item of X operation. Okay, that means it should issue the shared lock or the exclusive lock on the data item X before any read item X operation in T. Then the second rule is the transaction T must issue the operation write lock of X, that is the exclusive lock on X before any write item on X operation is performed in T. That means before any write item operation, we need to issue the write lock on X. Then the third rule is a transaction T must issue the operation unlock of X after all the read and write operations on X are completed in T. Okay. The transaction T will not issue a read lock of X if it already holds a read lock or a write lock on item X. Okay. So the read lock of X operation is not issued if it already holds either of this lock, either a read lock or the write lock on the item X. That. The fifth rule, the transaction T will not issue a write lock of X if it already holds a read lock or write lock on item X. And the last rule, the transaction T will not issue an unlock operation unless it is already holds a lock, unless it already holds a read lock or a write lock on item X. So these are the various rules that must follow by the transactions which is in the shared exclusive lock mode. Now we know the various types of locks, the binary lock and the shared or exclusive locks. Okay, now let's look into how can we guarantee the serializability by a two-phase locking method. Okay, a transaction is said to follow the two-phase locking protocol if all locking operations precede the first unlock operation in the transaction. A transaction is said to follow the two-phase locking protocol if all locking operations, that is the read lock and the write lock, precede the first unlock operation in the transaction. And the two phases in the 2PL are the growing phase and the shrinking phase. In the growing phase, new locks on the items can be acquired, but none can be released. So we can acquire the locks, but we cannot release any locks. So this phase can also be called as expanding phase. The number of locks increases from 0 to the maximum for the transaction. And the second phase in the 2PL is shrinking phase, also called as contracting phase, during which the existing locks can be released, but no new locks can be acquired in this phase. Okay, so shrinking means the existing locks can be released. That is, the number of locks else decreases from maximum to 0. Okay. Initially, a transaction is in the growing phase. The transaction acquires locks as needed. Once the transaction releases a lock, it enters the shrinking phase and it can issue no more lock request. Okay. For a transaction, the point in the schedule where the transaction has obtained its final lock is called the lock point of the transaction. So this lock point is the end of the growing phase. So this 2PL or the two-phase locking protocol consists of two phases, the growing phase as well as the shrinking phase. So in the growing phase, the transaction acquires locks. So the number of locks will be from 0 to the maximum. So it increases from 0 to maximum, and the final lock is called as the lock point. So this is the end of its growing phase. Okay, now we are moving to the phase 2. The phase 2 is the shrinking phase. That means we are going to release the locks that we obtained. Okay, so we are going to release the various locks that we obtained in the phase 1. Okay, so this phase 2 can be called as the shrinking phase, and this lock point is the point where we acquire the final lock, where we end the growing phase. Okay, the transactions can be ordered according to their lock points and is a serializability ordering of transactions. Okay, so based on this lock points, these transactions can be ordered. Okay, here we are given with four transactions T1, T2, T3, T4. Now let's look into whether these transactions are in two phase or not. Okay, as we know, this two phase means this transaction should consist of the phase 1 and phase 2. That means it should be in the growing phase as well as in the shrinking phase. In this growing phase, all the locks need to be acquired. So when we look into this T1, we can see that lock is acquired, but this lock is released also. Okay, so we are having a mix of lock and unlock operations. So this one is not in the 2PL. Here also we are having lock of S, then an unlock on that, then lock on B, then unlock on B. So the locks are not acquired together. So this one is also not in the 2PL. Okay, when we look into this T3, we can see that a lock X of B, then lock X on A, then releasing the two acquired locks. So this is in the 2PL, right? So we are having the growing phase followed by the shrinking phase. The T4 also we are having the locking phase or the growing phase and followed by the shrinking phase. So we can see that the transactions T3 and T4 are two phase and the T1 and T2 are not in 2PL. Now let's look into the lock conversions, the conversions between the lock. Okay, as we said, we'll be having two locks, the read lock or the shared lock and the exclusive lock or the write lock. Okay, the upgrade lock means the conversion from the shared to the exclusive mode. So in the shared mode, we know that the transaction can only read but not write. So from that mode, that means from only the read mode, if you are moving to the exclusive mode where we can have both read and write, then it is called as upgrade locking. Then the downgrade locking means we are converting from exclusive mode to the shared mode. So in the exclusive mode, we can have both this read and write access, but in the shared mode, the transaction can only read but no write. So it is called as downgrade lock. Okay, this upgrading takes place in the growing phase, whereas the downgrading takes place in the shrinking phase. Okay, depending on the sophistication of the DBMS, the locks can be applied to the whole database, a particular table, and individual record. The locks can be rarely be applied to individual data items within a record. Two types of two-phase locking protocols are the strict tuple protocol and rigorous tuple protocol. In the strict tuple protocol, this protocol requires not only that the locking be in two-phase, but also all the exclusive mode locks taken by the transaction need to be held until the transaction commits. All the exclusive mode locks need to be held till the transaction commits or aborted. And this requirement ensures that any data written by an uncommitted transaction will be logged in exclusive mode. So it prevents the dirty read. It prevents any other transaction from reading the data. Okay, so that's about the 2PL. This 2PL holds the transaction in this 2PL holds all its exclusive locks till transaction commits or aborts. In rigorous tuple protocol, not only the exclusive mode logs, here all the logs are held till commit or abort. So once this growing phase gets completed, in the shrinking phase, no logs will be released till it committed or aborted. So all the logs are held till the transaction ends or till the transaction committed or aborted. Okay, so in this rigorous tuple protocols all logs are held, whereas in the strict tuple protocol only the exclusive logs are held. Okay, now let's look into another point, dealing with deadlock and starvation. The deadlock occurs when each transaction T in a set of two or more transactions is waiting for some item that is locked by some other transaction T in the set. Okay, so two or more transactions are waiting for an item which is locked by some other transaction in this set. Hence, each transaction is in the waiting queue, waiting for one of the other transactions in the set to release the lock on the item. But because the other transaction is also waiting, it will never release the lock. And this condition can be called as deadlock. So in the given example, T1 is in waiting queue for T1 is in waiting queue for X, which is locked by the T2, while T2 is in waiting queue for Y, which is locked by T1. Meanwhile, neither T1 nor T2 nor any other transaction can access the items X and Y. And this T1 and T2 are deadlocked in this schedule. Okay, so here the T1 is waiting for the X, which is locked by T2, while T2 is waiting for Y, which is locked by T1. So this T1 and T2 cannot proceed without the items X and Y. So these two transactions are said to be in the deadlock condition. There are two methods for dealing with this deadlock problem, a deadlock prevention protocol and a deadlock detection and recovery scheme. Deadlock prevention protocol ensures that the system will never enter a deadlock state. Whereas in the second case, that is deadlock detection phase, it allows the system to enter a deadlock state and then try to recover by using a deadlock detection and recovery scheme. And both these methods may result in transaction rollback. Let us look into the various deadlock prevention protocols. First method, it uses the two-phase locking method, which requires that every transaction lock all the items it needs in advance. Okay, so it needs to lock all the items which needs in advance. It is not a practical assumption. Okay, the transaction need to lock all the items it needs in advance. Okay, that is one of the method. Then the second method is this involves ordering all the items in the database and making sure that the transaction needs several items will lock them according to that order. So first we are putting an order for the items in the database, and the transaction is the transaction that needs the several items will log them according to the order of the item. And this requires the programmer or the system to be aware of the chosen order of the items, which is also not practical in the database context. We'll be moving to the third type of prevention protocol, that is making use of a transaction timestamp, TS of T, transaction timestamp. Okay, it is a unique identifier assigned to each transaction. The timestamps, the transaction timestamps are based on the order in which the transactions are started. Okay, based on the order in which the transactions are started. Hence, if the transaction T1 starts before T2, then transaction timestamp of T1 is lesser than T timestamp of T2. So the older the transaction has the smaller timestamp value. The older transaction, that means the transaction which starts first has the smaller timestamp value. And two schemes that prevent the deadlock under using this transaction timestamp method are wait die and won't wait scheme. Wait or die and won't wait scheme. Okay, now let's discuss about the first scheme, that is the wait die scheme. So it will be in two states. It can be either in the wait state or in the die state. Okay, let us look into that. When a transaction Ti requests a data item currently held by Tj, then the Ti is allowed to wait only if it has the timestamp smaller than the Tj. Okay, so it depends upon the timestamp. It will be in either of this condition. It can be either in the wait state or in the die state. So if Ti is allowed to wait only if it has the timestamp smaller than that of Tj. So if Ti timestamp is smaller than Tj, then Ti need to wait. Else Ti is rolled back. That is called as die. For example, suppose that the transactions T1, T2 and T3 have the timestamps 2, 4 and 8 respectively. Okay, so if T1 requests a data item held by T2, then T1 will wait because the T1 is having the timestamp smaller than that of T2. T2 is having the timestamp as 4 and T1 is having the timestamp as 2. So the T1 will wait. If T3 requests a data item held by T2, T3 is having the timestamp as 8. So if T3 requests a data item held by T2, then T3 will be rolled back. It won't be in the wait state. Instead, it moves to the die state. It moves to the rolled back state. Okay, a transaction may rolled back or may die several times before acquiring the needed data item. Okay, so based on the timestamp value, we can determine whether the transaction is in the wait state or in the die state. Okay, that about the wait die scheme. So it depends upon the value of the timestamp. If the timestamp is smaller, then it should wait. The transaction need to wait. Else, the transaction is rolled back. Second scheme is won't wait scheme. It is a counterpart of the wait die scheme. When a transaction Ti requests a data item currently held by Tj, Ti is allowed to wait only if it has the timestamp larger than that of Tj. So it will be in the wait state if the timestamp is larger than that of Tj. Else Tj is rolled back. That is, Tj is wound by Ti. For example, the transactions T1, T2 and T3 have the timestamps 2, 4 and 8 respectively. Fine. If T1 requests a data item held by T2, T1 is having the timestamp as 2 and T2 is having the timestamp as 4. Okay. So if T1 requests a data item held by T2, then the data item will be preempted or stopped from T2 and T2 will be rolled back. If T3 requests a data item held by T2, then T3 will wait. So here it can move to the two states, wound state or the wait state. Okay. Suppose T2 has a shared mode lock on the data item and neither T1 requests an exclusive mode lock on the data item. Okay. So T1 is having the shared mode lock and T1 is having the exclusive mode lock on the same data item. Fine. T1 waits for T2 to release the lock. Now T3 requests for shared mode lock on the same data item. Since the lock request is compatible with the lock granted to T2, T3 may be granted the shared mode lock. T2 now releases the lock, but T1 needs to wait for T3 to finish. So a transaction T1 may be waiting for an exclusive mode lock on an item, while a sequence of other transactions request and are granted on shared mode lock on the same item. That is, T1 never gets the exclusive mode lock on the data item and the transaction never progresses and is said to be starved state. The database starvation can be avoided by granting locks. When a TI requests a lock on a data item Q in a particular mode M, the concurrency manager grants the lock provided that there is no other transaction holding a lock Q in a mode that conflicts with M. The second one is there is no other transaction that is waiting for a lock on Q and that made its lock request before TI. So based on these two conditions, the concurrency manager grants the lock on the data item Q. So thus a lock request will never get blocked by a lock request that is made earlier. Deadlock detection is usually handled by the construction of a wait for graph that shows the transaction dependencies. Okay, so the deadlock detection can be handled by means of this wait for graph. So this wait for graph is nothing but a directed graph which consists of nodes and edges. These edges are directed edges. So we need to create a node for each transaction and we need to create a directed edge from the nodes Ti to Tj if transaction Ti is waiting for Tj to release a data item that it needs. So it creates a directed edge if Ti is waiting for Tj. If Ti is waiting for Tj, then create a directed edge from Ti to Tj. And deadlock exists if and only if this graph, wait for graph contains a cycle. Each transaction involved in this cycle is said to be deadlocked. Okay, so deadlock exists if and only if the wait for graph contains a cycle. So as we just said, this wait for graph consists of nodes as well as directed edges. So this directed edge shows that the transaction T25 is waiting for T26. Okay, this graph shows that the transaction T25 is waiting for T26 and T27. The T27 is waiting for T26 and this T26 is waiting for T28. And we can see that there is no cycle in this graph and so the system is not in the deadlock state. Okay. Suppose that the transaction T28 is requesting an item held by T27. So the edge from the T28 to T27 results a cycle in this graph which implies that the T27, T26, T27 and T28 all are deadlocked. Okay, so this is the wait for graph with a cycle. Okay, now let's discuss about the topic concurrency control based on timestamp ordering. Okay, so to guarantee the serializability, a different approach which involves using a transaction timestamp to order the transaction execution for an equivalent serial schedule. So it is based on the transaction timestamps. Okay. The concurrency control techniques based on this timestamp ordering do not use locks, and so deadlocks cannot occur. Okay, now let's look into this timestamp ordering algorithm in which the transactions are ordered based on their timestamps. Okay, so this timestamps ensures the serializability, and this is called timestamp ordering. Okay, each database item X is associated with two timestamps. Read TS of X and write TS of X. The read timestamp of X is the largest timestamp among all the timestamps of transactions that have successfully read the item X. Similarly, write timestamp of item X is the largest timestamp among all the timestamps of transactions that have successfully returned the item X. Okay. Read TS of X means the read timestamp of item X means the largest timestamps that have successfully read the item X. Similarly, write timestamp of item X means the largest timestamp that have successfully write the item X. The second type of algorithm, basic timestamp ordering, TO. Whenever some transaction T tries to issue a read item of X or a write item of X operation, then this basic TO algorithm compares the timestamp of T with the read timestamp of X and write timestamp of X to ensure that the timestamp order of transaction execution is not violated. Okay, so if this order is violated, then the transaction T is aborted and resubmitted to the system as a new transaction with new timestamp. So whenever the transaction tries to issue a read item or a write item operation, it compares its timestamp with the read timestamp of X and the write timestamp of X to ensure that the order of the timestamp order of the transaction execution is not violated. Okay, that's the basic timestamp ordering. The timestamp ordering protocol ensures that any conflicting read and write operations are executed in timestamp order, and this ensures the serializability. That is, any conflicting read and write operations are executed in timestamp order. Okay, suppose a transaction Ti issues a read of X. If the timestamp of this Ti is lesser than or equal to the write timestamp on X, then Ti needs to read a value that was already overwritten. So hence this read operation is rejected and this Ti is rolled back. Okay. Here the timestamp of this Ti is lesser than this write timestamp on X. Okay. In the second case, if the timestamp of this Ti is greater than or equal to the write timestamp on X, then the read operation is executed and the read timestamp of A is set to maximum among the read timestamp of A, comma, the timestamp of the transaction Ti. So which one is the maximum value among this? That value will be set to the read timestamp of A. Okay. So the timestamp ordering protocol ensures that the conflicting read and write operations are executed in based on this timestamp. Okay. A modification of this basic TO algorithm known as Thomas-Wright rule does not enforce conflict serializability, but it rejects fewer write operations by modifying the checks for the write item of X operation. That is, if read timestamp on X is greater than the timestamp of the transaction T, then abort and roll back the T and reject the operation. If write timestamp on X is greater than the timestamp of the transaction T, then do not execute the write operation but continue processing. This is because some transaction with timestamp greater than the timestamp of T, and hence after T in the timestamp ordering has already returned the value of X. Thus, we must ignore the write item of X operation of T because it is already outdated and obsolete. And the third condition is if neither the condition in step 1 or the condition in step 2 occurs, then execute the write item of X operation of T and set write timestamp of X to the timestamp of T. So this is the Thomas write rule, which is the modification of the basic TO algorithm. So in this video, we discussed about the various concurrency control in databases. Thank you.